Out with the old, in with the new. Are you the sort of person who upgrades your mobile phone every time a new one comes out? iPhone 4S. Are you the sort of person who said, I've got my Nokia 3660, I've had it for 12 years, and I'm not going to change? As we age, we become creatures of habit. Some of us like to just dabble in the new things, but as time goes on, we like the comfortable way. We like the way things used to be. We like our comfy chair. We like how the music was really played when we were young, back in 2003. And so when a new thing comes along, we don't trust it. Metallica were really good in the 90s, but in the 2000s, they're just not worth listening to, for example.
Other way around.
Well, that's true. They had a good patch, then a bad patch, and then they've gone back to the way they used to do it in the 80s. Who is most likely to do this? Who is most likely to distrust the new and not want to change? You'd be surprised. It's not the old people. It's the younger people. I've found invariably, for example, when I've tried to change things around at church at 6 o'clock, man, you'd think I was murdering your mum. I mean, really. You'd think it's the old joke. How many Anglicans does it take to change a light bulb? Change. It's really obvious when you've got a really very small child, like my littlest children. When they're about 2 or 3 years old, they go through this OCD phase where they're obsessive compulsive. Everything's got to be exactly the same way as it was last time we did this. And you watch little boys just line up cars, and they just all going to be exactly right. And it's this idea of there is a way to do things and a system, and you must do this. And if they grow out of that, that's okay, and if they don't, they're called autistic. Jewish Christians must have felt pressure to return to the old way of doing things. When Jesus came onto the scene and he brought good news, he brought new news, a new way of doing things, a new way of relating to God, a way that does not rely on what we have done, but on what Jesus has done. But when Jesus came on the scene, this old covenant had been around for about 1,500 years. That's a really long time. You think it's a long time till a new iPhone comes out. That was a long time. And the whole book of Hebrews is written to just these people. People who are tempted to go back to the old ways. Let me convince you of this. The story so far, we see that Jesus is better than angels who gave the Old Testament. He is made like us. He is better than Moses. He offers a better rest than the Promised Land ever did. And he is the best high priest available. He is different from the priestly line, but that brings us to tonight. As you go through, you just see over and over and over and over again, the writer is saying, this is how things work, this is how Jesus is, and it is different and it is better. This guy buys the iPhone 4S because it's better than the 3GS. Look at chapter 8, verse 1. The point of what we're saying is this: we do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. So, think back to chapter 7, the priesthood of Melchizedek. He's saying, we've got this sort of high priest. Jesus is the great high priest. But notice that he works not in the tabernacle made by people, not in the temple in Jerusalem, which, by the way, dates this letter to pre-69 AD when the temple was destroyed. He says he works in the heavenly tabernacle. He works in the heavenly tent. And do you notice he says he works in the true tabernacle? So what's it saying about the one that he doesn't work in? He's saying that the other one is a copy. It's not as good. It's an earthly type. It's a copy. It's a funny way of saying things, because the first one that was made is really a copy of the one that is to come. If you look at, let me get the verse right, verses 5 and 6, he says, those people, those men, those priests, serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. And that this is why Moses was warned. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown on the mountain. Now, there was someone who didn't want to come in. The word that we have there that says pattern is the same word that we get the word prototype from. So, Moses was shown the prototype, which was a copy of what is in heaven. Now, here's a case where old technology works better than new technology. If we had an overhead projector, hands up if you don't know what an overhead projector is. I'm not that old. You'd have an overhead projector, and you could put something. You could put a book, or you could put a statue or something on the overhead projector. And when you're looking at the original thing here, you can see what it is. But the overhead projector just puts a silhouette up on the screen. So when you're looking at the screen, you go, I guess that's a book, but I don't know what the book says. I guess it might be a statue, but it doesn't. It looks like a square because it's the base. And what we're given here in the idea in Hebrews is that up until Jesus came, we were looking at the overhead projection. We weren't looking at the real deal. It was a copy. It was pretty good, but when you got the real deal, you didn't go back to the copy. I sometimes carry around photos of my family and my wife. But when I go home, I don't go, darling, gee, you're beautiful. I don't do that. I go to my wife and I say to my wife, oh, darling, you're so beautiful. You look much better in this photo. You're taller and all of that sort of thing. The copy was good, but the real deal is much better. And so we read in verse 6. Look at verse 6 with me. He says, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs, that is, the priests in the temple, as the covenant of which he is the mediator is superior to the old one, and it is founded on better promises. Now, we are New Testament people, and so some of these words just roll off the tip of your tongue. But when you get to the word new covenant, and you're an Old Testament believer, you should go, what? New covenant? What's that about? God makes a promise forever. God makes a promise which is for keeps. And what was wrong with it? That we needed a new one. Do you see that? Verse 7. For if there was nothing wrong with that first covenant, how does God make a covenant that's bad? How does God make a covenant that needs to be improved? Well, you see there in verse 8, the answer. God found fault with the people. So, just a moment on what a covenant is. Covenant's an agreement between two people where you both agree to do things. Marriage is a great example. Went to a wedding yesterday. Promises weren't exactly what I would have liked, but anyway. And in a Christian wedding, you have a man and a woman, and who aren't married to anyone else, and they're not closely related. And they say, I promise that I will love you for the rest of my life. For better, for worse, for sickness, in sickness and health, for richer, for poor, till we're parted by death. I make a promise. My promise to you is that you are it for me for the rest of our lives. And then the other person says, ditto. Short version. No. You're it for the rest of my life. This is a bit of a quite different case. That's it. You make promises. What was the problem with the covenant that God made with the people? Is that people couldn't keep their promises. God says, I'll be your God. And they say, yeah, we'll be your people. Really? Seriously? Well, what's with all the Baals and the Asherahs and the Ashtoreths and the Molechs and the, keep going? What's the problem? Well, the problem is that the people have hearts that go astray. And so, and this is why it shouldn't be a surprise for the people, but it was. The author to the letter of Hebrews says, we needed a new covenant. God told us about the covenant 700 years ago in the prophet Jeremiah. And you see, the rest of the chapter is a quote from Jeremiah 31. When God says, old covenant doesn't work. New covenant, I'm going to tweak it just a little bit. Instead of having tablets of stone that I write on, I'm going to write in your heart. And instead of having minds that need to comprehend and understand a law that doesn't sort of make sense, I'm going to write it in your mind and you'll know me. And your hearts will want to obey me and you will know who I am. You won't have to say, know the Lord, because they will know the Lord. My spirit will be in them.